Hey viewers, my name's Cara. This video was supposed to be up last week, but because of reasons, it's going up this week. This video is about transgender pagans, and in a way, it's the third installment in a series that I started like a decade ago. I have two videos on my channel that are very old. They probably could use an update by now, but I haven't watched them in a while, so I'm not sure. But there was LGBTQ Pagans #1 and #2, where I answered questions that people had asked me back then about gay male pagans and the fact that people always assume that male pagans are gay and stuff like that. And the other one I believe was about gender. So someone had asked me after that one to do a video about my thoughts on transgender pagans. Now, this summer, I've been working with an intern who you were introduced to in a little video earlier on my channel, Madelyn, who happens to be a Black trans woman, pagan, etc. So we've been talking about this quite a bit. And Madelyn actually has been captioning some of my videos as part of the work that she's been doing for the internship. So two of the videos that now have captions on them are LGBTQ Pagans #1 and #2, like I said, from years ago. So I had mentioned the fact that someone had asked me to do a part 3 of that series about transgender pagans, but I didn't feel comfortable doing it back then. So Madelyn has done a video now on her channel. It was last week. Mine was supposed to go up at the same time, but I wasn't able to make it happen, about transgender pagans and paganism from the perspective of one individual transgender person, Madelyn in this case. So I wanted to do a video talking about the fact that I had been asked to talk about this and kind of why I didn't, and just giving sort of that background, because that is what inspired me to sort of hand that over to Madelyn to do a video about it from her perspective, because I didn't feel that it is a perspective that I could speak from. So literally, it was a question that was given to me years and years ago. It wasn't even really a question. It was just a suggestion, and it was like, talk about your thoughts on transgender pagans. And I didn't know who the person was who asked it, so I had no way of knowing if they were a trans person themselves, if they were a transphobe, if they were something in between, who knows. So I wasn't sure if this was a person who was looking for validation or who was hoping that I would say something really negative and exclusionary because that was their view. So I felt like the only questions within that suggestion would have been things like, do I accept trans people? Do I think that trans people can be pagans? And those types of questions felt icky to me, to say the least. Like, yeah, of course, I think that trans people can be pagan, and I think they're valid and all these types of things, right? And I didn't feel like that was worth a video for me to say that. Because while I think that voicing support is important, I also really didn't want it to feel like any trans pagans who happened to exist in my audience here on YouTube or elsewhere needed to be validated by me saying those words. You know what I mean? They're valid on their own. They have inherent worth. And so I didn't want it to feel like, oh, now it's okay for all of us to accept this because now Cara has said it out loud, right? I so did not want to get into that, but at the same time, I do think voicing support is important, so I didn't know how to handle this, and I just felt like, because there's no specific question, and I feel like you're just asking me if I support trans people or not, I didn't think that was worth a whole video. But that was also years and years ago. As I mentioned, I also knew far fewer trans people years ago, so whatever I might have said back then would have been much less informed, would have been much less passionate. I would have felt maybe less invested because I didn't know the actual individual people who are affected by this at the time. I wasn't part of an activist, anti-racist, consciously trans inclusive and affirming tradition and community back then years ago. So yeah, I still feel like this is not a topic that requires me, as someone who does not identify as trans, to say anything in the way of validation. But I do think that voicing support is important, as I've said multiple times already in this video. And I talked to Madelyn about it, and Madelyn said, I do think that that would be a great thing to talk about because it is something that sometimes people think only matters to the people directly affected by it. So people think that trans rights only matter to trans people because it's their rights, and that's definitely not the case. I don't identify as trans. I support trans rights. I post about that kind of stuff a lot more often on my Instagram. I don't really talk about it here because, again, this is a video format type of thing, and I haven't really felt like I have enough stuff to say in a video or that it warrants me saying anything in a video. When it's on Instagram, I follow a lot of trans people. I can share their own words and amplify their own voices and what they are saying about their needs and wants and struggles and joys and all kinds of things, right? So amplifying voices is something that I can easily do. I can do that in other ways in videos, but that is just not something that I typically do, such as having people on as interview guests, etc. So I mostly wanted to do this video to just address the fact that this was a topic somebody asked me to talk about years ago, but I didn't feel like it was my topic. And so I sort of handed over those reins to Madelyn to talk about on her channel, but I wanted to do sort of a companion video about it here to introduce that topic, link to Madelyn's video, so that'll be in the end screen of this video. Definitely, I may also put it in the description, but it'll definitely be popping up in the end screen for this video. And I thought, if anything, I could talk about how there are many people, including myself, in the general pagan, neo-pagan, witchy sphere, realm, whatever we want to call this, who are moving away from binary gendered language because we also feel that it doesn't make sense. We also feel that it is not inclusive enough for us and the way that we envision the world and the way that the universe works. So yeah, it's definitely a matter of wanting to make it clear to my audience, in case you don't also follow me on Instagram so you don't see all the stuff that I post there all the time, that these are things that actually matter to me too. You know, it's not something that I do or talk about because I feel like I have to in order to be politically correct or anything like that. It actually matters to me too. I may not identify as trans, and I may not feel like I have the experience of living life as a trans person because of that, but I am definitely someone who rejects the entire idea that things have to be binary all the time, meaning like that it has to be one thing or the other. I have always very much felt that there is an entire spectrum of existence between the two poles at the end of either end of a spectrum. When we have a linear spectrum and there are extreme opposites, everything in between also exists. And that's always been a part of my personal cosmology, I guess we could say. And then other times where it's not even linear, but maybe there is a circular pattern and one thing just constantly moves into the other, all of that makes sense to me. All of that is how I envision sort of the world working. That is intrinsic to the type of pagan and the type of witch that I am. Along those lines, talking about pagans and witches and our various views, I did also want to mention that I know that there are lots of people who are part of paths that have been extremely binary based throughout history, the history of their existence, and there are conversations happening among cisgender and other gender nonconforming and non-binary folks, so not just specifically trans people is what I mean there. Everybody who is not just specifically trans. Tons of other people are also examining these things within our own beliefs, within the systems and traditions that we may work in, within our communities. And so I have seen a lot of discussions taking place. Not everybody has the answer immediately right away as to how can we make sure that trans people feel included. Is this something that actually makes sense with the cosmology that has been taught for this specific tradition over the years? Whatever. I really like the word cosmology today, apparently, so I hope I'm using it correctly every time. To me, it makes sense. But whether we have the answers yet or not, I did want to point out that I have seen these conversations happening. And especially within reclaiming tradition, which I consider myself a part of, we have always been a consciously inclusive community, but we are always learning as well. So there's always more to learn. There is always more work to be done. And that applies to inclusion and centering the concerns of and doing better for members of all types of different marginalized identities within our communities. That is genuinely important to me. And I want to emphasize that because, again, I think many of you know it if you watch all of my videos all the time. And especially if you follow me on Instagram, you see me posting or sharing in my story at least things about these kinds of topics all the time. But I want to say that because in the past, some of the times that I've talked about these issues on my channel, I've gotten some comments from people who seem to think that I'm just following some kind of trend of feeling like I need to talk about these things because that's what people expect me to say, and that's absolutely not what I'm doing. These issues are genuinely important to me as a person, as a pagan, as a witch. These are intrinsic to the way that I feel my communities should be. But yeah, so I've seen these conversations happening. They are ongoing conversations and issues within the communities that I take part in. We're always striving to do better than we did the day before and learn from any mistakes that we make. Also, when it comes to books, I've been talking about this throughout the last year, that books are really like time capsules of whatever that specific author or authors were thinking about a topic at the moment they finished writing it, and then it was published maybe a year or a couple years later after they finished writing it. And then maybe that book was published decades ago at this point. It doesn't necessarily reflect the way that they think about these issues now. So there are also people who have written books that have written stuff in the past that does not seem super inclusive. And so what I think is important is to look at today, if they are still alive, do they still think that way? Are their views still exclusionary? Or have they also learned and grown and changed their minds about some things? And are they acting differently today? Are they teaching differently today? And so on. Because it's not necessarily true that because somebody wrote something in a book a couple decades ago or even longer ago, that they feel the same way now. I know that I have said things in videos just 1 decade ago that are not the way I feel now. There are things that I have learned more about within 1 year, let alone 10 years, so I just want to point that out as a reminder. However, there are still some people who we might see some problematic, exclusionary things that they've said or done in the past, and then we find out they are still doing and saying those things. That matters to me as well, because if they are still purporting those same exclusionary views, then we know that those views are current, right? That they have not updated, they have not learned and grown, etc. So just want to point that out. That's always something that I pay attention to as well. Certainly a lot of gender essentialist language comes up in a lot of the older books that I'm reading now. I'm reading a lot of pagan history type stuff. And what's important to me is to look at, okay, but how are those people teaching it now? Or if those individual people are dead, because a lot of our elders have passed away now, how are the people who learned from them updating with the times? Are they updating? Are they learning and growing? Or are they still supporting the same views that were taught to them that are problematic? And are they perpetuating those views? How is the community that came out of this thing dealing with these issues now, today? So I know I've talked about some of those things before, but I did want to bring them up again here because I think it really applies to a lot of different things. It applies to so many different individual issues and social justice concerns within this wider realm of intersectionality between all of these other social justice issues and how we interact with those things within our spirituality or religious paths as pagans, neo-pagans, witches, and so on. So I can't really offer any experience to you as a trans pagan. Madelyn can do that. And so again, I'm going to link her video. And again, only, as always, only speaking from our own personal experiences. So Madelyn does not speak for all trans witches ever, all trans pagans ever, of course. But so I figured for this video, I wanted to give that background on how this topic even came up, and therefore why I was inspired to offer it to Madelyn as an assignment for the internship. But also, I thought about it and I felt like I can at least offer views as a community member, as an informal educator, as I am here on YouTube and elsewhere, and offer insight into what I have witnessed other people doing, discussions that other people are having about these issues within their own communities, within their own traditions, and just to let you know that even in non-trans spaces, these conversations are happening because people want to be inclusive, not just in word, but in reality. Not just because we have to because of some kind of pressure from people, but because we really want our communities to be inclusive. We want people to feel safe and included. As a nature-based, earth-based practitioner as well, diversity is healthy. So if you do follow me on Instagram or anywhere else, don't be surprised when I post things about trans rights being human rights, and that there is nothing radical about being trans exclusionary. And when I don't support views that are TERFy, T-E-R-F, trans exclusionary radical feminist, which again is where the nothing radical about trans exclusion comes from. Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if I post about that stuff, because guess what? I care about this stuff. So yeah, it actually matters to me and to many other people. And I would go as far as to say it matters. Full stop. So thank you very much for watching and or listening to this video. Go check out Madelyn's video as well, and I will see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye. Shout out to all of my trans friends who I've met over the internet and in person over the last decade. I love you, I support you. Continue living your wonderful, magical, badass lives, and I will endeavor to do the same.